Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, hi there, it's Matthew Blades, and welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. If you join us each and every Wednesday, then you see this guy right there. That's Dr. Dave, who's been on our podcast for years. Dave, I want to jump in right away because this is going to be such a great conversation. You know, one of the things that I talk a lot about in my life right now is this idea of air check your life. And it's based on a simple framework that we used to use back in the radio and television days, where when we got off the air, we would go into a room, we would listen back to the show or watch the show back, and we would ask ourselves three very simple questions. What did we get right? What was okay, but it definitely needs a tweak if we're going to continue to do it? And what should we never do again because it is absolutely killing our ratings, right? And the discussion last week and the discussion that we're going to have today feels like it lands perfectly in that middle section of where people are taking a look at their life and they're saying, all right, there's some things that are working okay here, but they could be better. And it feels like you're going to set us up today to, I hope, understand better that process. Yeah. So why don't we start with a recap? Last week, you were talking about metacognition, and I'll have you just recap that really quick and then talk about awareness control, and then we can jump into this conversation today.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were going to set it up exactly that way, but the model that you were describing about air checking yourself is exactly what we're going to talk about today. So, yeah, right. So we hadn't rehearsed this before, but that example kind of nails it. So the idea that awesome. You're gonna try something, you're gonna stop after the fact and look back on it and say, how did that work out? Did that get me where I needed to be, or do I need to do something different? And the stuff that works, you keep doing it, you practice it, you get better at it. The stuff that didn't work, you discard it and try something different. So today we're going to talk about the awareness control matrix. We had talked about that a bit last week, but after the show, I kind of reflected on a bit and thought there's a lot more that we could go into here. And there's a lot of teachable pieces to this that I think are worthwhile going back into in more detail, right? So just a quick recap. We talked about the 4 quadrants, where quadrant 1 is you have no awareness and no control, right? So no filter, whatever comes into your mind, you just autopilot do it. The results may not be what you want, and you have little control over the process. You know, this is who I am, and this is what happens. If you move into quadrant 2, you start to have some awareness. So metacognition is developing, but the control mechanisms aren't where they need to be. So you're driving a car that has faulty brakes. You know, you got to step really hard, and it takes a long time to slow down. Sometimes, you know, it gets a little sketchy coming up to that stop sign. And then
you've driven one of my old cars before, haven't you?
I could tell you a story about an MG Midget that I had one time, and almost ended up in my neighbor's front yard.
Oh my God.
And then quadrant 3, which we're not going to talk about today, I think we're going to save that for next week, is you have little awareness, but you have a lot of control. So that's kind of a different thing. And then the sweet spot, the place that we want to end up in, is quadrant 4, where you have a good amount of awareness. So metacognition is developed, and you have a good amount of control. So when the light comes on and you realize, oh, wait a second, this is a pattern that I know. This is a pattern that takes me to places that I don't want to go. Let me pause for a second. Let me take a deep breath. Let me see what my options are before I automatically react to it. So that's quadrant 4. So what we're going to talk about today is moving from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, which we kind of touched on last week. And then what does quadrant 2 look like? And what keeps us stuck in quadrant 2? And how do we move through that to get to quadrant 4?
Awesome. Yeah, I remember last week you said kind of quad 4 is the sweet spot. For those that really want to geek out with Dr. Dave, you got that Substack QR code in the top left. So he writes about this on his Substack page. So if you want to go check that out, I'll leave that up for the duration of our conversation today. And then, you know, hop on at will and check out what's in that brain of his. So I'll let you lead, man. And I may just poke around and ask a few questions as you're jumping through this.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we talked about last week moving from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2, which is developing that metacognition. So the fact that there's a pause there, you're not automatically responding to things, you're aware of old patterns or starting to become aware of old patterns. So that's the moving from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2 is you're starting to develop awareness. The problem with developing awareness happens faster than developing control. So you might be in therapy, you might have started a journaling practice, you might be doing some relaxed breathing or meditation, which is giving you the space to start becoming more aware of some of your automatic patterns. That's great. That's an important piece of growth, but it can be frustrating for people because the control piece isn't automatically there. So that's something that has to be practiced and rehearsed. And it's tricky because you can't do it on a theoretical basis. You have to wait until you get set off by something. And then in that moment when emotions are high and when you're in a situation that you have to react to, that's when you have to practice it. So it's a bit of a daunting process if you're serious about learning this and committing to personal growth.
What I'm thinking about is an old situation in my career. And look, I think I was developing this metacognition. I had a boss that I really didn't get along with, and he was so challenging to me. And in a few therapy sessions, what I recognized was that on the way up, mom and dad, right? On the way up, there were some things that happened there that looked and tasted and touched and just felt a little bit too close to the way that this guy behaved. Mm-hmm. And it would just trigger me. And I almost couldn't help myself. And then, so I was working with somebody and they were kind of, trying to help me understand that, he is not them and it's not the same situation anymore. And, try to find a way out of it. And so I'm trying to put this in tangible terms for people because that feels like what you're talking about. And I remember being in meetings with him and something would happen and I could just feel myself like get just about to go off the rails with this guy. Yeah. And I would pause and I would say, okay, he is not them. Okay, this is not the same situation. Kind of try to work your way through this whole thing. And that feels like what you're talking about in a sense.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly what I'm talking about. Now, in that particular situation, so if that's a known pattern that happens, this guy sets me off every time, and I know, it reminds me of my overbearing dad or whatever it is. If you know that going in, you can preset your mind before the meeting and walk yourself through it and say, I know this guy's going to freaking piss me off. And I know how he pushes my buttons. So if you think it through ahead of time, you can kind of preempt your brain from reacting automatically. So this is kind of a little bit off topic, but this goes to the fight between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And I've seen this a lot in PTSD. So if you're doing nothing and all of a sudden something surprises you, something comes at you out of the corner of your eye and you turn to see what it is and it triggers that fight or flight response. That's the amygdala getting there first. So the amygdala is designed to signal danger. It's there to protect you. It's there to put you on alert when there's a threat coming so that you can respond to it quickly. But when it has a lot of false alarms, you find yourself in a situation where adrenaline is pounding, you can't think clearly, and then you're really going into these automatic responses that we're talking about without metacognition and without being able to control where it's going. Where if you think it through ahead of time, that's using your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that organizes conscious, deliberate thought and sequencing of events. Just let me finish this one thought and then I'll get you in.
Sure.
The prefrontal cortex can soothe the amygdala and suppress it a bit so that if you think it through ahead of time, it kind of puts salve on the amygdala so that when you go into the situation, your button is still pressed, but you're not reacting automatically. So you feel activated, you feel tense, but you're not immediately following automatic patterns that you haven't thought through.
So what was going through my head was I feel like we could save some marriages right now because we probably have couples that are going to check this out, or people that are in relationships check this out, and maybe your spouse triggers you, and you're like really trying to figure out what is this all about. And this feels like the kind of practice or exercise or thought process that we should have. Like, as I pull into the driveway, I'm like, okay, I know this is coming. I know a few things are going to show up as soon as I walk in the front door. Just try to stay calm. Understand that, they've been dealing with this all day. You've been dealing with this all day. And now the worlds are going to merge, and it's going to be okay. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah. Yep. And even, you're thinking from your point of view, I've been dealing with customers all day and people have been pissing me off, and I just want to go home and have a nice quiet meal and just be left alone. Okay, that's fine. That's your perspective. What has your wife been doing all day? Has she been dealing with screaming kids all day? Has she been dealing with stuff, breaking and, trying to balance a dozen tasks that need to get done? And
running all over creation.
She's at the end of her rope now, right? So pausing and stepping back from it a bit, and leaving some space for the other person, and not just looking at it from your point of view, can help to bring that balance in.
Okay, good stuff. All right. I just wanted to interject because I thought we have an opportunity here. Let's take it.
Yeah. Well, and the problem becomes the nervous system overall is designed for survival, right? So if something is coming at you as a threat, the brain is going to prioritize doing what it has been trained to do through practice to help you survive the situation over stopping and pausing and reflecting on the situation. So stopping and pausing becomes a luxury when there's an actual threat, but the brain doesn't distinguish between what's an actual threat and what's a perceived threat. So prior training and experience might have conditioned the brain to respond to something as threatening when it's actually not. And so finding that way to put that space in there can be a real challenge. And then the other thing too is sleep deprivation, chronic stress, feeling burned out at work, having some physical problems going on, maybe being emotionally triggered. So those are things that then skew the brain toward getting into survival mode instead of reflective mode. So the idea is we regress under stress, right? So anything that happens that's stressful is gonna interfere with your ability to stay in quadrant 2, if that makes sense. Matthew, you're on pause. You're on mute.
So sorry about that. I should have learned how to do this by now. But you mentioned that like people get under stress, and I'm wondering where drugs or alcohol come into play here. And do they slow this process down? Do they almost mute this process? Do they make it almost impossible for this process to take place?
That's a great question. Different drugs are going to do different things. So if you're talking about anything,
let's talk about the two most common, like alcohol and marijuana.
So alcohol is going to act as a suppressant or depressant, but it also can be disinhibiting. So sometimes people that are under the influence of alcohol have less of a filter, and there's no feedback loop. Like the give a shit is broke. That's how I used to understand, how people, especially chronic drinkers, how does somebody end up living under a bridge and being okay with that? Not that they're ever really okay with it, but for that to be an option, you have to, the part of your brain that would care enough to choose a different outcome is not working, right? So when your spouse is coming to you with a legitimate concern and you've had a couple of drinks in you, and you spout off at them and say something hurtful to get them away from you because you just want to be left alone in that moment, you're not able to appreciate how what you're saying is so harmful to the other person. That ability to empathize is broken in that moment.
All right, makes a lot of good sense. Well, you've said it before several times on our podcast. Alcohol turns off the part of the brain that cares. And I wonder, I wonder where pot would come into this, because, pot can make people reflexive. It can actually turn you inward and make you actually take a closer look at yourself. I mean, that's some of the benefits of the plant. There's some downside to it too, but some of the benefits are that it can slow you down and make you think about what's going on, or at least it doesn't let the blood boil to a 10. It kind of keeps you at a 6 or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. Well, anyways,
No,
let's
what I would
move
say
on.
about that is, if you're trying to make lasting changes, right? So now you've developed some metacognition. You're aware of patterns that you want to change. You don't quite have the control to change them. You want to be able to sit with those uncomfortable emotions. You want to be able to allow some of those negative feelings to come up and figure out how to deal with them, how to redirect them. Right. So when I said before, the learning takes place in real time, that's part of what I meant. So it's similar to when you're trying to treat somebody who has an anxiety condition. So let's say you're afraid of going to the mall. Crowded public spaces just freak you the hell out. You just want to run out of there. You're having, you get panic attacks. You just can't tolerate it. And so you start to develop patterns of avoidance because of that. You have to be able to sit with the anxiety, realize that anxiety doesn't mean you're going to die in the moment. It just feels uncomfortable. And if you sit through it, eventually that pattern starts to become suppressed, and the next time it happens, it's not quite as strong. The next time it happens, you can cut it off quicker. But if you use pot, alcohol, something like that to mellow you out before it, your brain never gets a chance to rewire by going through the tough situation and learning how to form a different pathway and be able to practice that.
That's fantastic. We're kind of running out of time, but I do think maybe we end on this. Do we want to end on this idea of why we get stuck, or do you feel like we've chopped that up enough today?
There's a lot of reasons why we get stuck, and I think we probably need at least another 20 minutes to discuss it.
Okay.
So maybe we can save that for the article when I eventually get it written.
Okay.
Or
next week too. We'll be here every Wednesday, so we can kind of build on this, and then next week you come back to us, and we can kind of help you understand why we keep getting stuck in these old patterns and why they are so hard to break. And look, I'll give you a little teaser. I've been through this journey before, and I know you've helped several thousands of people get through this journey yourself, but there does become a time in your life where, look, if you're looking to change your life, you have to change your life, and you have to start doing something different. And for a lot of people, that's going to look like, I need to have a hard conversation with somebody, or I need to change my environment, or I need to change the core 3 or 4 people that I'm hanging out with in my life. It'll be really challenging to change until you do those things. And so we could spend some time next week talking about those things, because my goal is for people to take a look at their life, figure out what's working, figure out what needs that tweak, and figure out what is absolutely crushing you and getting in your own way to be the person that you want to be. And if we do that for folks, man, game on. That's the win, because I know firsthand, and firsthand, the freedom, the clarity, the lightness that's waiting for people on the other side of developing those skills.
Yeah. I think there are enough specific situations that people get stuck in that it's worth doing another episode on this. So let's come back to that next week, and we can go into some specific ways that people get stuck, and we can talk a bit about how to move through them. and then maybe hold off on quadrant 3 for another week. But there's a lot there. Yeah, there's a lot there.
It's a great plan. It's a great plan. Psychiatrist Dr. Dave is with us every week. He's got his Substack articles that he's just started to write. They are up in the top left. I want to end with this. If you hit this particular QR code, this will take you to Dr. Dave and I's brand new 6-week wellness course, which is called Revive and Thrive. And I love the way that you put it. I'll give you my version, then I want to hear how you explain it to people. But this book mirrors my healing journey, and it mirrors your clinical practice. But the way that you explain it to people in terms of like going to the gym is also quite refreshing.
Well, yeah, I mean, people go through great lengths to improve their physical stamina, their muscle strength, their endurance. What do we do to improve our character? What do we do to improve our ability to relate to other people and to have better quality relationships? So just like physical exercise gets you physically stronger, there are things that you can do to develop your character and your emotional stability as well. And I think the benefit of the program that we put together is we talked about what are the places where people get stuck. You know, what have I seen in my clinical practice where people constantly get stuck, and these are themes that come back for discussion over and over again across many people that I've seen over the years. And so that's where we.
Yeah, great. Well, look at that link will take you to Amazon, where you can pick up the 6-week wellness course. We priced this thing so fair. It's less than $10 a week.
How can you go wrong?
Yeah, you just can't. You just can't. And look, the whole idea behind it is that we get you started on the journey. And and next week's probably going to be a really incredible week for people to figure out where they're getting stuck. And I'll make a bet, and I'll you don't have to take the bet because you know I'm going to be right about this, but I'll bet where people are getting stuck are going to be anywhere between 1 and 3 of the things that we wrote about in this book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Dave, thanks for your time today. Thanks to everybody for watching.
Yeah. Let me just say one last thing. Change doesn't happen all at once. So you have to buckle up and get settled with the idea that you're going to be trying to make little changes. And the more you practice those little changes, they become second nature. You have to overwrite the grooves that are in your brain already. And there's no shortcut to doing that. So give yourself some slack, give yourself some grace, and just buckle up and commit to a long process, and be happy with the little changes that start moving you in the right direction.
Amen to that. We'll see everybody tomorrow when our good friend I call him Dr. Dave, and then I want to say Dr. Jill McMahon, but Jill McMahon will be back tomorrow for Guns and Grief. And, last week we had such an important conversation on grief at work. I can't wait to see what she brings to us next. So Dr. Dave, enjoy your day, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right. You too. Take care, everybody.
All right. See you tomorrow.